So what if I could stamp my passport with this experience right now, record the fact that I was here at this time, and then share it. So send it out to friends, post it to Facebook or whatever, and like the guy was saying earlier, it becomes kind of a social object, right, that people can interact with. So that was his kind of flash, of insight, just that metaphor of the passport. And he called me the next day and described this concept, and meanwhile, I'm sitting at home in Kansas City. It was midwinter, and he describes this great mountaintop experience, and I was a bit jealous. But I was also intrigued because of the technical challenges, right? So I'm a geek, and I love sinking my teeth into these kind of difficult problems, technically. And I thought, all right, iPhone SDK is just a few months old now. I'm going to download it, try it for the first time, and see if I can build this thing that you imagined yesterday. So I did, and spent the first few days, getting nowhere fast, but quickly was able to hack together a really ugly but functional prototype. And I remember that it was winter mainly because this was the first time in my professional career that programming equaled like sweating and exercise. Because in order to test this thing, I had to actually write a few lines of code, put on my winter coat, pull on my boots, and walk around the block, and see if it would work. And it wouldn't, and I would go back inside and fix a few bugs and come back and try it again. So that was a sort of novel experience as a programmer. But long story short, once I got it working, it sort of validated for us, okay, there's something here, there's an interesting idea. Let's build it out into a product and see if the rest of the world kind of agrees, that it's interesting. So we spent the spring doing that, launched it about a year ago, and we were validated, people, and actually I'd say the way we were validated is that we immediately started getting feedback about what sucked about it. Which I took as a sign of success, because it meant that people cared, So if it was totally uninteresting to people, it would have just gone nowhere. So we started iterating quickly, and by the summer, I would say, we had a version of Gowalla that was actually really compelling and useful and valuable to people. And that's when growth just started to kind of take off like a weed. So that's kind of why I'm excited and interested in this space from a geek perspective. Now for the rest of my talk, I'd like to talk about two kind of other perspectives. Number one, why is location-based technology and location-based social networks, why does it matter? Why is it going to be interesting to the world at large, right? What is it about this that I think is significant? And then kind of for the second part, I want to talk about what are the business applications, which I think is what a lot of people are here to think about today. How can we use this if it matters to people? How can we help, provide that while also serving our kind of business goals and organization goals? So, to get into the first part, I want to start with the story. And actually the story kind of starts right down the street. When we first started building Gowalla, it reminded me of something that I learned in class here at KU. Actually, when I tell people that I'm a programmer, they assume that I was a computer science major in college, but actually I studied linguistics. And so in one of my linguistics classes, I remembered studying this thing called, I should get my slides ready, called greeting rituals. And this is this concept that, like so many things in linguistics, is something that happens every day, 10 times a day probably, but that you're not really conscious of. So imagine, for instance, that you're walking down the street and you see an old friend that you haven't seen in a couple of years. What are the first few sentences of your conversation sound like when you bump into each other?
Hey, how you doing?
Bingo. Yeah. Hey, how you doing? What's up? How's it going? What's up? So this is one of those things that it's interesting because these questions that people ask each other, totally out of habit, totally automatically, are not really informational questions. You don't actually really want to know what's up, how are you. You kind of are just getting the ball rolling, right? And the value of it socially is that it creates this kind of, it allows you to suss out your relationships with the person, right? It allows you to figure out, do they have time to talk, What's our relationship right now? Should I just keep walking, or can I ask a favor? You know, how close are we after all? That kind of stuff. But it's very like unconscious kind of cues that are happening in that kind of small talk. So what's interesting about this to me is that, as you'd expect, greeting rituals are an absolutely universal phenomenon. All cultures, all languages have these kind of things. But the rituals themselves are not universal at all. So for instance, this is what I learned down the street in my classroom on campus here, is that in Samoa, there is no direct translation of the phrase, "How are you?" There's just no way to ask that question in that language. So what do people say when they run into each other on the street? The first question that you would ask a friend if you ran into them is, "Where are you coming from?" And then, "Where are you going?" So this kind of struck a chord with me, or I recalled it when we were thinking about Gowalla, because it made me realize that I think location is fundamental. So it taps into something that is absolutely at the core of our identity and of how we understand our relationships with others and with the world. So, you know, 10 or 15 years ago or something, when the internet was first starting to become mainstream, people kind of extolled the virtue of placelessness. You know, that it didn't matter if you're sitting in Siberia or in Manhattan, you have just as much access to this network and this conversation. Which of course is true, but I'm sort of excited by the fact that technology has now kind of brought back something that is so core to being human, which is these ideas of location and how we really interact with the world around us. So another kind of philosophical lens that I like to use when I'm thinking about these things is this concept called the macroscope. Are you guys familiar with that word? Maybe not. So this word, I think, might have just been coined not that long ago. And to understand it, just imagine what a microscope is, right? It's a tool that a scientist would use to kind of gain access to the world at a molecular level, right, or a cellular level. And a telescope is something that you could use to kind of gain access to the world at a cosmological level, which of course your kind of normal senses don't provide for at all. There's just no way with your naked eye to access reality on that scale. So a macroscope then is a way to access the world at a social scale, or at a societal scale. Here's a definition that I think it was Matt Webb said. A macroscope helps us see what the aggregation of many small actions look like when added together. So I think actually a lot of social networks are macroscopes in a sense, right? If they're used, if they're viewed in this way, you can use Twitter or Facebook as a way to see a whole lot of interactions kind of clumped together and see them on a little bit more of a macro level. So, at the risk of being a tad grandiose, I like to think that on its good days, services like Gowalla can function as macroscopes. Here's kind of my favorite example of what a macroscope is. This might be hard to see from the edges of the room, but these are two posters. I actually have them hanging on my wall at home. It's two different maps of Manhattan, are actually the same map from two different perspectives. But the novel thing about this map is that it has a projection where the horizon kind of curves up at you. So you get to experience two kind of perspectives at the same time. You can both see at the bottom of the map where you are right now, the buildings kind of in 3D in front of you. And as you look up, you see kind of the bird's eye view of the city. So this is one example of a macroscope that kind of allows you to comprehend multiple levels at the same time. And it reminds me in a little bit of way, here's the quote from the guy who created this map. The ability to be in a city and to see through it is a superpower, and it's how maps should work. Which I've just always found really compelling. So here, this is obviously a much smaller scaled example, perhaps, or less grand, but this is a screenshot of the iPad version of Gowalla, which is coming out real soon now, like maybe tomorrow. As soon as Apple approves it, it'll be out. So, I'm not don't mercy and pray. But in this map, I can see on the kind of the right side where all of my friends are in the last couple of hours. So just kind of at a glance, I can get that kind of